Armando Hasuringan, Biology and Medicine videos. Please make sure to subscribe. Join the 4-man group for the latest videos. Please visit Facebook Armando Hasuringan. In this video, we're going to look at the hormones that change through pregnancy. But mainly, we will focus on the hormones and the physiology of parturition. So we have to begin where it all began, with fertilization, where the sperm meets the egg. Then together they form a zygote. The zygote divides like cells, and they are cells, and they just keep dividing continuously, forming a cluster of cells called, known now as the blastocyst. The blastocyst is what will implant into the uterus, the uterine wall, and following implantation, the cells within the blastocyst that make up the blastocyst will undergo granulation. Essentially, through this process, cells will differentiate and form unique cell lines, which then forms the fetus itself. This whole process occurs in the first trimester of pregnancy, which is the first 3 months of pregnancy. We will now look at the changes in female hormones during the first, second, and third trimesters. And after this, we'll briefly discuss what they mean. However, again, this video is only stating what is occurring and won't go into too much detail because this video will mainly focus on parturition. So here I am drawing a graph with hormone concentration on the y-axis and the number of months during pregnancy on the x-axis. So we have 1 month, and then we have 3, 6, 9 months. The 9 months is typically where parturition takes place, the giving birth. Now, an important hormone produced by the embryo and soon the placenta is beta-HCG, which stands for beta-human chorionic gonadotropin. Now, this hormone is produced by the placenta and peaks about week 7, and then it just falls down. Beta-HCG is produced by the placenta in order to keep the corpus luteum alive. The corpus luteum is a dead follicle in the ovaries, and because it is being kept alive thanks to beta-HCG, the corpus luteum is able to continuously produce 2 important hormones, which are estrogen and progesterone. This all occurs in the first 3 months of pregnancy, the first trimester. In the second trimester, which is between months 3 to 6 in pregnancy, the fetus, of course, will keep growing. Beta-HCG, as I mentioned, peaked at week 7 and then just drops down. But it is still being produced by the placenta. By the second trimester, estrogen and progesterone levels still continuously increase because it is still being produced by the ovaries. But the placenta is also taking over this role and begins producing estrogen and progesterone as well. By the third trimester, which is months 6 to 9 in pregnancy, the placenta plays the main role in producing the hormones. It doesn't really produce any more beta-HCG because it is now producing a lot of estrogen and progesterone itself. Now, importantly, when week 40 hits, or basically the 9th month hits, or basically when the baby wants to come out, all these hormones will drop. Estrogen, progesterone, beta-HCG is dropped and doesn't get produced no more. This is in order to allow the uterus to contract and let the baby out, essentially. This process is known as parturition. Parturition, as the dictionary describes it, is the act or process of giving birth, childbirth. And now we will focus on parturition and the hormones and physiology behind it. So here I am drawing a pregnant woman whose water just broke and is in labor, about to give birth. Some important organs and structures we need to know: the brain here, we can find an endocrine gland called the hypothalamus. And below the hypothalamus, we have the pituitary gland, but we are going to mainly focus on the posterior pituitary gland. Then here we have the placenta and uterus, and here of course is the baby. Here is the baby's brain, its kidneys. Above the kidney, we have to note the adrenal glands, which is important in the physiology of parturition. Now, it is important to understand before we get into this diagram that throughout pregnancy, in the first, second, and third trimester, when estrogen and progesterone levels were rising, these hormones were actually preparing the mother for labor. You see, estrogen from the ovaries and the placenta increases oxytocin receptors in the uterus. And we will talk about oxytocin, but it is essentially an important hormone for uterine contraction. Progesterone also is being produced throughout pregnancy, and it results in the relaxation of smooth muscles, which inhibits essentially uterine contraction during pregnancy. This is important because we don't want the uterus to contract during pregnancy, as the baby is not ready to leave the uterus just yet. Okay, now let's just look at parturition in a step-by-step process. So firstly, the fetal stress, when the fetus wants to leave the womb, will stimulate corticotropin hormone release, which is also known as adenocorticotropin hormone, or ACTH, and it's produced by the anterior pituitary gland. And this hormone will stimulate cortisol release from the adrenal glands. So here we have the adrenal glands that produce cortisol. So 2, we have cortisol release. So what does cortisol do? Well, cortisol affects the placenta. Mainly, it causes 3 things. It decreases progesterone production from the placenta. It decreases estrogen production from the placenta, but it increases prostaglandin production in the placenta. So this is why in the month 9, we see just a decrease in progesterone and estrogen, remember. But then we have an increase in prostaglandin. What does this mean? Well, prostaglandin is a molecule that actually is just found throughout the body, but in this case, it causes the uterus to contract, and thus helping the baby leave the uterus. And then 4. So as the baby is sort of pushing out, this causes uterine and the cervix to stretch, and thereby stimulating some sensory nerve fibers around the area. The sensory nerve fibers that are being stimulated will stimulate oxytocin production from the hypothalamus. So here, as you can see, it's signaling to the hypothalamus to produce oxytocin. Oxytocin produced by the hypothalamus will be stored actually in the posterior pituitary gland. And then 7 here I wrote, the posterior pituitary will then release oxytocin. So oxytocin is released from the posterior pituitary. What does oxytocin do? Well, oxytocin causes 2 main things. It causes the uterus to contract, thus helping the baby leave the uterus, but also stimulates the production of prostaglandins. So it stimulates the uterus to make more prostaglandins, which again causes the uterus to contract. And this whole cycle actually just continues because the uterus is contracting. The baby's head pushes against the cervix and pushes out, thereby stimulating the stretch receptors, and then the stimulation of the stretch receptors will stimulate the hypothalamus to produce more oxytocin, and the whole cycle just continues. But essentially, after some time, the uterus will keep contracting until the baby will leave the uterus and essentially be born. So I hope you enjoyed this video on the physiology of parturition as well as the hormones that we looked at throughout pregnancy, mainly beta-HCG, estrogen and progesterone. And as well as during parturition, we noted that oxytocin and prostaglandins are very important. So thanks for watching. Bye.